Hello, and welcome to Stock Takes with Katana. This podcast series is all about growth strategies, trends, and little pieces of advice from different experts for growing businesses dealing with inventory. And today we have a very special guest. We have Chris, who's an expert on all things inventory software implementation. So, Chris, do you want to go ahead and give us a little intro?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Chris. Thanks for having me on the podcast today. I look forward to it. Basically, I'm involved in inventory implementation consulting and tech stack advisory. So I help companies figure out what kind of problems they're dealing with. We help deconstruct the root cause of those problems. We find ways forward to help them grow their companies, and also for companies that are trying to lean out the way they're working, using old school softwares, but they want to go more digital. We help with that. And
how did you end up in the sort of career of implementation and consulting? So what was your journey to where you are right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I would say I moved abroad in 2010 when I finished university. I got my first job working as a production planner for a small startup manufacturing company. While I was there, they were figuring out their own processes, and we didn't have any big budget for complicated software, so we were working in Excel. Mm-hmm. And so basically, I started building from scratch the manufacturing process inside of a large Excel spreadsheet, managing the inventory, coming up with batch cards to follow the lots as they go through the production processes. So I did that for 2 or 3 years, and that's kind of where I got started with the whole concept of manufacturing, inventory, et cetera. When I left that company, I actually started my own business. So I became an entrepreneur. I'm an avid skateboarder, so actually the story is interesting. One of my colleagues, he was a physicist, and his sister was a chemical engineer. And they were working, and she was working on her thesis for like this material called ionic liquid. And it's like a liquid that stays in a liquid form when it freezes and it doesn't burn. And if you add that into a lubricant, it improves the friction reduction capabilities. So being a skateboarder, I'm like, oh, can we use this in downhill longboarding? So we actually started a company from that on the basis of our thesis, which is like science, this kind of Breaking Bad style product. So I got into, direct to consumer manufacturing from that because we were making it in our hometown and sending it all over the world. We were selling it on WooCommerce and e-commerce, et cetera. So, I got exposed to the initial struggles as an entrepreneur would. What software do I need in order to track this? How do I distribute it whenever I'm selling it all over like these 30 countries, which we distributed it to? And lastly, after I exited that business, I actually got into software itself. So my first job out of running that company was working at Pipedrive. If you know Pipedrive, it's a CRM solution. It's quite a global software for companies that are for salespeople. Mm-hmm. And when I was involved working there in support, we were taking calls all the time. Clients were saying, oh, I sell this, I sell that. How do I set up my pipelines? How do I move deals? How do I register my orders? How do I register invoices with my accounting? How do I automate this or that for my sales team? So that became kind of this hop on calls, deal with problems that people have. And I took thousands of calls while working there. So firsthand experience in cloud software at that point. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I eventually found myself working at Katana, of all places. So I started with the Katana team early on in 2018, was here for 4 years, got to see all of the workflows for manufacturers, inventory solutions, how do they use it. I was also around during the early stage of its development, so seeing product change over time and the type of customers using it over time, and then also advising them, working in support, onboarding, and customer success. So that was kind of what I was doing here. And when I left Katana, I joined another business that was a company called Evicon, and they do manufacturing. So they do manufacturing process monitoring using OEE solution. So basically, long story short, I got the chance to implement it as a production planner for a manufacturing company. I got to be an entrepreneur who was evaluating my own problems and figuring out what software to use. And lastly, I was also working as a person in a software company providing those solutions. So it gave me kind of a full picture of that from those three perspectives. And one of the other guys who was here at Katana, he left and he said, "Hey, Chris, come join me. Let's do some Katana consulting, helping people get implemented." Implementing is hard. It's not an easy thing for a complicated solution. Any complicated solution that you're working with, whether it's in e-commerce, sales, accounting, manufacturing, inventory, you name it. Shipping softwares, for example, working with 3PLs, everything. So, that's basically, he called me up and I got into consulting working at ABX, which is a better experience software group.
Very cool. And as you rightfully said, implementation is hard. What exactly makes it hard?
There's a lot of things that can go into that process. It's difficult because a lot of customers who we work with, they are looking for a solution to certain problems that they're dealing with. And those problems that they're dealing with are more often related to processes, but also related to technology. And, if you're a business owner or maybe you're an employee responsible for those projects in the company and you don't have all the time in the world to go out and read, okay, what can I use to solve this problem? Then, oftentimes finding somebody who can help you with that, that's kind of where my plan comes around to helping out those customers. So what makes it actually hard is the process of learning what you need, finding the root cause of the problems you're dealing with, how software can address those issues for your business or for the existing problems you might have, and then taking the time to invest in it to roll it out once you've made a decision. But making the right decision first is also one of the first steps.
So right now, the companies that ABX that you guys are supporting with implementation and software selection even, what would you describe them as? So are there any specific industries, certain size of organization? So what do they have in common?
So we work with two types of clients. Companies that are scaling, typically in the $1 to $20 million range, and also companies that have been around for a while. And they have evolutionary time. They have evolved over time to adopt different softwares that are cloud-based. But the one piece that still lingers is the inventory solution or the manufacturing solution that they're using. And oftentimes that's on-premise. So they want to find a way in order to digitalize the way they're working with their other tools. So I would kind of best describe it as scaling up, finding the right solutions for your existing problems, or even scaling down to be more lean and in order to be more flexible. So these behemoth monsters that some businesses have as on-premise solutions, those things, they're trying to cut themselves away from that so they're not completely stuck to it, and they have more agility in the way that they run their business in order to adapt to the changing environment around them.
But on the top, changing environments, definitely. I mean, tech is developing super fast and there's a huge focus on operational efficiency right now. So tech definitely plays a big role in that. But when it comes to making the implementation process painless, what's your playbook? So what is your approach when you walk clients through the process to actually streamline that so that there isn't downtime?
Yeah. So, first it starts with discovery, understanding their problems. So we offer, for example, what we call a tech stack assessment, where we'll take a look at what your existing solutions are and figure out if what you have makes sense for what you're working with today. We'll be able to tell you, does that scale with your existing setup or not? We'll also discuss a little bit more about process-related problems that clients might have. Those are fundamental, like internally within those businesses. And when it comes to how customers are using software, we'll do something called a software health check. So we'll go into your solution, we'll take a look at all of the data, how you're using it, how your workflows are using it, and we'll try to identify gaps where something might be a problem. So that's kind of like a few examples of ways in which we will work at the beginning of any sort of implementation, understanding the problems. Now, when we get into the implementation phase, it takes a lot of commitment from the client in many ways. So to make it as painless as possible, that upfront commitment needs to be existing. So basically, we start off with data preparation and importing. So getting all of the data ready to go, that's the biggest and the hardest part. Customers that are moving like from scratch into something, they have to come up with the setup and the structure. And then customers that are coming away from something like migrating from a more complex system, we have to reset everything and how it works in order to optimize it for getting the solution to work for their business. So that takes a huge commitment, getting it all imported correctly and the structure set up. The second phase that we have during an implementation is essentially workflow mapping and documentation. So once we have the structure of how we think it should be best set up for the client, then we'll start to document the workflows of how they're going to take what's going on in the software world with the physical world and convert that into a reality. And then we document that for them to prepare them for training on it. Last bit would be the training piece. So we'll probably do a few simulation runs with the solution, make sure that everybody is on the same page based on the documented workflows, make sure that the training is all set up and ready to go, whether we're training operators on the shop floor, warehouse workers, whatever it may be, back office users. And then when it's decided that people are comfortable and ready to move forward, we do go live. And the go live part is final stock counts, and then the full switch with all of your channels that have to integrate into that solution. And then off they go, and then start moving. So it doesn't have to be a complicated process, but that's the way we try to structure it, so it makes more sense for customers.
Makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, of course, that it requires a commitment and a willingness to kind of change the approach, not just the technology, but very often during discovery, the processes that may not be working or no longer serving the business at the stage that it's at. How do you handle those objections, or how have you seen these change drivers at the organizations that actually eventually come to you and seek out support and help? So how do you help them get that internal buy-in?
Right. Okay. So there are a couple of use cases similar to that, which we would have to figure out. And let's take those two examples. First off, the scaling client. That client has an immediate need to solve a problem, so they're a little bit different in how they approach it, but they will do careful process selection to find the right fit for their needs. So with those guys, getting buy-in isn't as hard as it is for like other types of organizations, especially the scaled down type of businesses. I mean, you have to think about it. Companies that are using inventory solutions, if they've already adopted one, the biggest objections we get from that scenario is we have to stop everything we're doing because we have an ERP, we have an inventory management solution. It is the heart of our business. So, you know, you got to rip the heart open, take it out, replace it. Not very fun. The amount of energy that goes into that, the amount of time, the amount of cost to the business to make that transition is a huge investment up front. And so that is probably the biggest resistance to change that we often find when we're dealing with clients that are working through those types of issues. So what we would do to help with that is if we come across a situation where a client is like, no, we can't do it, it's too much, then we say, okay, well, hold on. Let's take a step back. We've evaluated the problem. We have identified this, this, and that. And then we say to them, we know that you don't know what's going to happen if we decide to move forward with this because nobody can predict the future. So we say to them, how about we roll into a proof of concept? Why don't we take a sample of your products and your items, your inventory? Let's put it into an instance and let's actually do a small installation of it. And then we'll train your team on the miniature version of it. We'll find somebody within your company internally who's going to be your product internal champion for this project. And they'll run with it while we're helping organize it on a high level. They're doing all of the work inside. So if we can get somebody like that and we can get the buy-in and we say that like this is a lower risk to do a miniature implementation, then we can start to deliver incremental value to help that client at least understand if this is good for them or not. Then they can decide if they want to move forward at much, much lower risk. But also at the end of that, you've invested in learning something about your business. So we offer a solution like that as well to help reduce the barrier, also move at their own pace, and keep things nice and simple because it is complicated. So we have to simplify it.
Mm-hmm. And how often are the challenges purely around the technology being used? So sometimes it's about yes, we need a new solution with these missing features or this lack of connectivity, like you mentioned, with other tools that they already use. But do you sometimes, with clients, realize that actually the tech is fine?
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just the knowledge piece, understanding the workflows. We've seen cases where clients, let's say somebody took on a software, they implemented it. You have like one person in the business who's actually really knowledgeable in that. But the one thing that comes up is, they've moved on to other things. They're doing something different in the company, and then they need to bring in other people. Those other people that are existing there might not have been properly taught by the original person. And so they have to be retaught. So there's cases like that. There's also cases where clients have not adopted their processes to the software technology correctly. So what's interesting and what's inherent about many softwares is they're often designed with kind of what UX people call a happy flow. That happy flow gives the idea of like, okay, the ideal scenario, the workflow looks like this. And so clients either A, are going to do something that they're doing in their own business and then try to use the software incorrectly, the way that they see it, as opposed to the way it's designed. So if you can find that happy flow and adapt it to your own business processes, you'll often find many times that, if they adopt it, then they'll be in a better position and actually run more optimized workflows within their business. So there's different ways to go about it. So I would say, generally speaking, it depends.
So obviously there are successful implementations and failed implementations, and you guys strive for a better experience when it comes to using software. So what would you describe as a successful implementation? What are the sort of key indicators that has worked out well?
Well, once we find out the root cause of a problem, ultimately we want to measure against that problem. So, and it's usually like a combination of multiple small wins from a successful implementation. And sometimes it's a huge win. Customers that I'll give you a simple example. A client has been using spreadsheets their entire growth phase. They hit 2 or 3 million in revenue. And then all of a sudden they're finding that they're running out of stock for materials, or because they run out of stock for materials, they can't ship a product. The client's mad, bad customer experience. Okay, so the business gets a bad reputation, things go downhill. Okay, big problems caused by something simple. Inaccurate spreadsheets that probably have too many cooks in the kitchen playing around on them, and happens.
Shit happens. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So a simple ROI on returning for that is a client who, number one, is able to never run out of material stock because they're not using inventory Excel spreadsheets anymore. Number two, their clients are consistently happy regularly. And number three, the processes that are in place that they might have had to use Excel spreadsheet formulas to solve, they probably don't have somebody in-house who's a spreadsheet expert fixing that all the time. So, you use the software solutions that's designed for that, then that problem is scalable. That solution is scalable. That solves those problems. Okay, so that's like a simple example of how you can take somebody from Excel spreadsheets to a successful inventory solution and how it helps their business. I have seen that in real life, actually.
Okay.
So it's completely crazy. Other scenarios I've seen where it's like just being able to understand the cost of your products is an example. We had one client who was doing so many different things in different softwares that were not connected, that what actually happened is that they never had an understanding of what their real inventory levels were. They didn't know what was the balance of their assets at the end of the month or beginning of the month. They didn't know what was the cost of the products that they sold, so they couldn't track profitability. This was really annoying for them. So they were constantly doing cycle counts every month, and they had probably over 3,000 items in inventory, not to mention the number that they had to count of those. And then, sure enough, like, talk about a headache from a failed implementation, whatever solution they were using at the time. So basically, for this client, we did an implementation for them. and got their stock accurately tracked in real time, anytime. So they log in, they can see, okay, the cost of this product today is this. Cost of this product today is this. This one is not profitable. It's not moving. There's not any turnover for it. What do we do with it? We don't need to buy this one because it's well stocked, but this one over here we have to buy pretty soon. This is real-time knowledge. So this is very measurable in the sense that like it reduces errors, it optimizes the way you work. We had another customer as well who was entering data, like sales orders, manually in 4 different locations. And all they have to do is connect the softwares and enter it one place, and it goes 100 sales orders a day, manually entered in 4 locations all the time.
So 400 entries.
400 entries daily. They were spending 12 hours a day just doing that. Complete waste of time. So we just gave them one order entry point, and then the rest was automated. And you can quantify that in hours every day saved. So, I mean, these are simple examples, but big examples would be if a client is using an old software solution that they've spent tens of thousands of dollars every year to renew the license, like an on-premise solution. Every time they have to update it, they have to hire a specialist to come in, update it, custom implementation all the time for the maintenance of it. Going to them and saying that, hey guys, there is a way where you can adopt a solution on a subscription plan. It connects with all of the new softwares that you're using, and it costs a third of the price. And it's out of the box.
Yeah.
You might have to do a couple of different things at this point in time compared to what you're doing today. But if you go through the hassle of the implementation, which will be a huge overhaul, the investment will give a much larger return on investment in the long run. And there's a lot of fear in that section, in that part of the decision-making process for successful implementations. How do we know it's going to give me an ROI?
Of course. Around change, there's always fear. But at what point does the fear of failure as a business outweigh the fear of change, in your opinion? So just from what you've observed, talking to so many clients and businesses who are on the brink of that level of change.
Oh, that's a hard one. It kind of comes down to when the headaches of the existing solution far outweigh the pain of the change. That's where the change takes place. One example was a client using an on-premise shop floor manufacturing execution system. They were using it regularly on all of their processes 10 years ago. Perfect. And then as those people have left the company over time, then out of, let's say, 10 processes that they had been using it in the very beginning, they're using it on 2 processes. The rest is just like workarounds where they're like printing up papers and filling them out manually and stuff like that. So it's a real problem. And once they get to that point where everybody is just completely tired of the admin work that constantly goes into dealing with those types of day-to-day in and out issues, that's when the change will actually take place. Or when the company is suffering financially to a point that they have no choice but to make that decision. So
makes sense, both scenarios. Then as we sort of wrap up, what advice would you give to a business just looking for an inventory solution, whether that's with a consultant or on their own? What would you advise them to do as a first step?
Well, they should understand what the root cause of all their problems are. Again, that's what we help with at ABX as a consulting company. They'll find what those problems are very easily as they experience the pain, but identifying them is the hard part. Whether it or not it's a technology problem, like the software, or it's an in-house operations workflow problem. I do recommend that if you find out that it's something that's taking place internally with the processes, you address that first. And then when you get that as optimized as possible, consider looking at software solutions as a way to to automate that. However, on the flip coin of that side, on the flip coin of that, because there's always two sides to a story. If you're using a software today, you'll need to invest a lot of the time in how the processes are designed around that software and modify them to your business. So you'll find often a lot of the times that the way the software is meant to be used is the way that it will actually improve the way you work. So there are two sides to that story. You have to figure out which side of the coin you're on in order to really know best approach for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Very useful. But I think that's it. Any last thoughts, last words before we wrap up?
No.
Keep calm and keep implementing.
Yeah.
I don't know. So cheesy.
I don't have any last words.
Thank you so much, Chris, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Super helpful. And if anyone listening is looking for an implementation partner or consultancy or support with going about the challenging process of implementation, Chris and ABX Group are there to help. So thank you.
Thanks.